Dear Mom and Dad, I began, raising my wine glass with a smile so calm it unsettled the room. Since we're all here tonight, I figured it's the perfect moment to say congratulations. You're about to have a new daughter in law to replace me. My name is Sophia. I watched as forks froze midair and my mother in law's eyes widened in slow motion horror. My father in law's grip on his glass tightened. Across the table, my husband blinked once. Ava, sitting 2 seats away, stopped breathing. I mean, it's only right to welcome her, isn't it? I added, gesturing with a tilt of my head toward Ava. After all, she's carrying a baby that might be his. Gasps rippled through the room like a slow moving earthquake. My husband opened his mouth, but no words came out. Ava looked like she wished the ground would swallow her whole. I placed an envelope in front of my in laws. Photos, receipts, messages, evidence. Um, the truth they hadn't seen coming. That night, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't cry. I simply told the truth and shattered their perfect illusion in one toast. Before I became the woman who exposed a betrayal over dinner, I was just Sophia, the girl who believed in love built on loyalty, not lightning bolts. I met Ethan during our final year of college. He was ambitious, charming, and a little lost. I, on the other hand, was practical, focused, and fiercely loyal. While others partied, we studied late into the night, dreaming up the company he now owns. Our future, he used to call it. When he couldn't afford tuition, I sold my grandmother's ring. When he was hospitalized for exhaustion, I took a semester off to nurse him. When we graduated, I worked 3 jobs while he built the company from scratch. Every coffee I served, every spreadsheet I updated was part of our shared dream. His parents didn't like me at first. I was too serious, too intense. But the night his father had a mild stroke and I rushed him to the hospital faster than any ambulance, things changed. I became more than a daughter in law, I became their second daughter. They would call me instead of Ethan when they needed help. I cooked them meals during flu season. I handled their prescriptions. They trusted me. I never complained when we delayed our honeymoon so we could fly to Tokyo for a business pitch. I gave up my teaching fellowship so we could relocate for his office. I handled the taxes, the budgeting, the family birthdays, and every unglamorous detail that made his life seamless. We weren't rich in those early years, but we were a team. I still remember the nights we stayed up talking in our tiny apartment, surrounded by unpaid bills and cold pizza. He'd grab my hand and say, "When we make it big, I'll give you the world." I believed him, not because I needed diamonds or mansions, but because I believed he meant it. When the company finally took off, I was there. I designed the brand's first logo. I built the client pitch decks. I taught him how to speak with investors, coached him before meetings, even stood in when he lost his voice during a key presentation. I wasn't just a supportive wife. I was his secret weapon. And when his parents got COVID and were too weak to cook or clean, it was me who moved in temporarily to care for them. I bathed his mother. I cut his father's toenails. I spoon fed them soup while keeping up with his PR schedule. I never once asked for credit. I never once thought I needed it because I believed love meant sacrifice and that eventually he'd see all of it, not just with gratitude, but with love 10 times over. But the problem with being the steady one, the one who stays up late to make sure the insurance is renewed, who remembers every dentist appointment, who holds it all together, is that people stop seeing you. They forget the glue exists until something breaks. I didn't realize it then. I still believed I was cherished. Uh, I thought loyalty bought permanence. But now I know Love built on sacrifice can crumble just as easily as one built on seduction. Looking back, there were moments that should have warned me, like how his thank you became quieter, shorter, how he started calling his secretary before calling me, how his parents slowly went from, "You're the best thing that ever happened to him," to, "He's just busy, dear, it's the stress." Still, I smiled through it all. I told myself this was the price of success. There were good days too. Quiet dinners where he'd bring home my favorite wine, or moments he'd look at me with soft eyes and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I clung to those like a drowning woman to driftwood. I started taking yoga, then baking, then gardening, anything to feel like myself again. But I still prioritized him. I still lived around his calendar. I still showed up, even when he didn't. And perhaps the deepest irony is I wasn't bitter. I didn't suspect an affair. I didn't question his late meetings or out of town conferences. I thought we were simply growing older, busy, trying to hold our lives together. I didn't know I was the only one trying. The signs were subtle at first, so subtle I brushed them off like lint from a sweater. Ethan began coming home later, blaming back-to-back meetings and investor dinners. I believed him. I even packed him vitamin supplements in his briefcase. "Don't burn out," I'd say with a kiss on his cheek. He used to smile. Lately, he just nodded. He stopped asking about my day. Our dinners, once filled with laughter and shared stories, turned into silent meals with him scrolling through his phone. "Just emails," he'd mumble. Ava started showing up more often. At first, it made sense. She was a marketing consultant and had helped Ethan land 2 big clients. She was my best friend. I trusted her. She and Ethan clicked too easily. Their jokes came faster. Their conversations lingered after I left the room. Sometimes I'd find them in the kitchen talking quietly. When I entered, they'd pause for a beat too long before smiling at me. One evening, I found Ava sitting on the kitchen counter in one of my aprons, laughing as she tasted the sauce Ethan was cooking. I froze. She looked up and beamed. "Hope you don't mind, Soph. Ethan invited me to test his new recipe." I smiled. I said I didn't mind, but I did. I started noticing other things. Ava's perfume on Ethan's jacket, a wine glass in the sink when I hadn't been home, the way he shut his laptop the moment I walked in. When I asked him directly, his face crumpled with annoyance. "Jesus, Sophia, not everything is a damn conspiracy," he snapped. That was new. He never used to raise his voice. I apologized. I felt guilty for even asking. His parents, oblivious to these shifts, still praised him as working so hard. When I tried to express concern, his mother gently patted my hand. "You always overthink, sweetie. Just give him space." So I did. I gave him space and watched him fill it with distance, with avoidance, with um, another woman. I began shrinking myself to keep the peace. I made excuses for him, to the kids, to his parents, to myself. I stayed up late folding his laundry, still clinging to the hope that it was just a phase. Stress, maybe, a midlife fog, anything but what it really was. Then came the night he didn't come home at all. Or I texted, I called, no answer. When he returned the next morning, smelling of hotel soap and peppermint, he claimed he'd crashed at a friend's place after too many drinks. I laughed with him, relieved. He even kissed my forehead. But I noticed he didn't say, "I'm sorry." He never did. That was when I stopped talking about it, because somewhere deep inside, I already knew. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done in years. At first, it was just a few lines. "Ethan didn't look at me tonight. Ava wore his favorite color. He smells like her." But as the pages filled, I noticed a pattern. It wasn't just suspicion, it was erosion. Ava began texting him during dinner. I caught a glimpse of her name flashing across his phone, followed by a heart emoji. He didn't flinch, just turned the screen face down and continued eating. I tried to reclaim our intimacy. I booked a weekend getaway for our anniversary, only to hear him say, "Work's too crazy right now." He didn't even look up from his laptop. One night, I wore a dress he once said made me look like his dream. He barely noticed. "Isn't that a bit much for dinner at home?" he muttered. I remember staring at myself in the bathroom mirror afterward, makeup perfect, lips trembling. That night, I took off the dress alone and slept facing the wall. By then, love no longer felt like partnership, it felt like a performance, and I was the only one still on stage. The betrayal wasn't a single moment, it was the crescendo. But the finale, that I'll never forget. It was the night of Ethan's company gala, a lavish celebration for landing the biggest client in their history. I'd planned the entire thing: the venue, the caterers, the guest list. Ava, of course, was in attendance. She'd become an unofficial part of Ethan's creative team. I even helped her pick her dress. I didn't know then that she was dressing for my husband. The entire night, I watched them from across the ballroom. The glances, the casual touches, the way they moved like two people, trying to pretend they weren't already something more. I kept smiling, kept circulating, kept pretending I didn't see. It was after midnight when I walked out to the parking lot and saw them. Ava leaned against his car, her hand brushing his chest, her mouth close to his ear. He didn't pull away. He leaned in. I froze, then turned, then walked away. The next morning, I said nothing, just watched him sleep, tangled in sheets I'd ironed the day before. I made his coffee, buttered his toast. My hands didn't even shake, but I did start digging. It didn't take long. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, texts that hadn't been deleted. He hadn't even bothered to use a different passcode. The worst part, the casual cruelty in their messages. Ava mocking my outfits, Ethan calling me uptight, their inside jokes, their plans. They'd been together for months. And then, as if fate were taunting me, Ava showed up 2 weeks later, tearful and breathless. She pulled me aside after a family brunch and whispered, "Sophia, I'm pregnant." The world didn't shatter. It folded in on itself neatly, like a house collapsing in a controlled demolition. "Does he know?" I asked. She nodded. "He's scared, but he wants to do the right thing." The right thing. After stealing my husband, my trust, my family, now she wanted to be righteous. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through our home like a ghost, touching the couch we bought together, the dining table we built from scratch, the photo frames with vacations we faked happiness through. And then I knew what I had to do. I called Ethan's parents, invited them for dinner, told them I had an announcement. I called Ava too. She sounded nervous. "Should I bring anything?" "To yourself," I said. "You're the guest of honor." Then I booked the photographer. The day of the dinner, I dressed simply: blue silk blouse, black slacks, a touch of lipstick. I cooked Ethan's favorite meal. I set the table for 8. When everyone arrived, I smiled like a woman who had just won the lottery. I didn't suspect a thing until I raised my glass and said, "Dear Mom and Dad, since we're all here tonight, I figured it's the perfect moment to say congratulations. You're about to have a new daughter-in-law to replace me." The silence that followed could have swallowed the whole house. Ava choked. Ethan went pale. His mother gasped, her fork clattering to the floor. Then I laid out the evidence: photos, checks, receipts, even Ava's appointment confirmation for her OBGYN. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I let the facts speak. Ethan's father stared at him like he didn't recognize his own son. His mother wept quietly. Ava tried to deny it first, then crumbled under the weight of her own shame. And Ethan? He didn't say a word, just sat there silent as everything he'd built with me turned to ash in his hands. I cleared the plates, packed them leftovers, and closed the door behind them, locking it. But the story didn't end with that dinner. Not even close. The very next morning, Ethan tried to do damage control. He cornered me in the kitchen, eyes bloodshot, voice low. "You ambushed me," he hissed. I laughed. "Ambush implies you weren't already guilty." He pleaded. Swore it was a mistake, that he loved me, that Ava meant nothing, that the baby changed things, and he was confused. "We can fix this, Sophia," he said. "We've been through worse." "No," I replied. "You went through worse. I carried you through it. This time you chose your path, and I'm choosing mine." He stood there, mouth opening and closing like a man drowning in the ocean he poured himself into. I didn't throw things. I didn't scream. I simply handed him an envelope. Divorce papers are what stunned him most. Wasn't that I wanted out. It was that I'd already spoken to a lawyer, prepared every document, frozen joint accounts, and scheduled movers. He had underestimated me for so long, he forgot I was the architect of his first success. And now I was building my own escape. That was the last night he ever slept in our home. Word spread quickly. Within days, friends, family, and colleagues knew. Some offered pity, others praise, but the silence from Ava and Ethan was deafening. Then came the final insult. Ava posted a photo online, a blurred sonogram, captioned "New Beginnings." She blocked me before I could see it, but mutual friends sent it my way. It didn't break me. It confirmed everything I'd suspected. There was never remorse, only performance. She didn't love Ethan. She loved the prize, the life, the status. A week later, Ethan showed up at my office, unannounced. "I don't even know if the baby is mine," he confessed. "She's been seeing someone else." I blinked. "So now you know what it feels like?" And he looked hollow. "I miss us. I miss you." But I didn't, because something inside me had shifted. The woman who once lived for his approval, who once made herself small to protect his ego, she was gone. And what remained was steel. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and looked him in the eye. "I don't miss me when I was with you." Then I walked away. After the truth came out, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. The house was quieter than ever, but not in a peaceful way, in a way that echoed. Every corner reminded me of what used to be or what I had convinced myself we were. I found myself wandering from room to room at night, unable to sleep, opening drawers and cabinets I didn't need, just to feel movement. The kids stayed with my parents for a few days while I tried to pull myself together. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. What came instead was numbness. I lay on the living room couch, in the dark, staring at the ceiling, letting hours pass without noticing. People messaged me, friends, colleagues, neighbors. Some were shocked, some said I had a feeling. A few even admitted they had seen things, heard things, but hadn't wanted to get involved. That hurt more than the affair itself. I kept replaying moments in my head. The anniversary dinners I planned, the times I defended Ethan, the years I gave up to help him build something that wasn't just a company, it was supposed to be our life. One afternoon, I opened the closet and saw his suits still hanging there. Without thinking, I began ripping them off the hangers, tossing them into trash bags. My hands shook so hard I scraped my knuckles on the zipper of his travel bag. I didn't stop. It felt like purging poison. When the closet was empty, I collapsed onto the floor and cried. Finally, ugly, guttural sobs that tore through me like a storm. I cried until I couldn't breathe, until I had nothing left. That night, I drank wine straight from the bottle. I cursed, I screamed into a pillow, I punched the couch cushions, and then I stared at the mirror and asked, who the hell am I now? I didn't have an answer. The next morning, I woke with a pounding headache and a deeper sense of loneliness than ever before. But I still got up. I brushed my teeth, I made coffee, I watered the plants. I didn't know why, it just felt necessary to do something. Days passed in a blur. I forgot meals, forgot dates. I stared at emails without reading them. I missed appointments. I hated how much I still checked my phone, expecting a message from him, even just a, how are you? But there was nothing. Worse than his betrayal was the silence that followed. Like I had been erased. Until one evening, there was a knock at my door. It was my mother in law. She stood there, holding a casserole, eyes swollen from crying. I don't know what to say, she whispered, but I miss you. We sat on the porch and ate together. She told me Ethan was spiraling, that his father barely spoke to him, that she didn't blame me. She hugged me tighter than she ever had before. That was the first night I slept through till morning. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was something. But healing doesn't happen all at once. The day after that porch dinner, I opened my laptop. I stared at the blank screen for an hour, fingers hovering over the keys. Then, slowly, I began typing. Not for work, not for anyone else, just for me. I wrote everything, the good, the bad, the humiliating. I wrote until the truth no longer felt like a wound, but like a witness. I started walking again, just down the block at first, then around the neighborhood, breathing in cold air, feeling the sun on my face. I didn't check my phone. I didn't rush home. I signed up for therapy. The first session, I cried for half an hour straight. The therapist just listened. It felt strange at first, talking to someone who didn't know me, but also safe. And slowly, through the chaos, a small voice in me whispered, you're still here. I wasn't strong yet, but I wasn't broken anymore either. And maybe that was the beginning. One morning, I found a drawing taped to the fridge. My youngest had drawn us, just the two of us, holding hands under a rainbow. Mommy, I made this at Grandma's, she said, beaming. That simple crayon sketch did more for me than hours of crying. Because in that moment, I remembered I wasn't alone. I had them, my children, and I still had me. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a mother, a builder, a fighter. I had survived the kind of heartbreak that could wreck a person permanently, but I was still standing. Not strong yet, but standing. And that was enough for now. Rebuilding started with little things. I rearranged the furniture, not out of necessity, but to remind myself that this was my space now. Mine to shape, mine to protect. I bought fresh sheets, ones he'd never touched. I painted the walls in colors that made me feel calm, not colors he once approved of. The kids came home and their laughter filled the halls again. At night, we cooked together, danced to silly songs, spilled pancake batter, and slowly stitched joy back into our lives. They didn't ask much about their father. I didn't offer much either. I gave them presence, consistency, and warmth. Everything I had left. Professionally, I felt lost at first. For so long, my identity was wrapped in his success. But I knew I had skills, I had experience, and I had connections of my own, ones I'd helped build when networking for him. It started with a lunch meeting. An old college friend turned investor reached out after hearing about the divorce. She'd always admired how I managed Ethan's early pitch decks and brand vision. You have the mind of a strategist, she said. Why not build your own? At first, I laughed it off. Then I started sketching ideas. Late at night, after the kids were asleep, I'd pull out a notebook and brainstorm marketing strategies, business names, core values. I realized I didn't want to replicate what Ethan had built. I wanted something different, something honest, community based, purpose driven. I envisioned a consultancy that helped small women led businesses scale through digital tools and brand clarity. Not flashy, just meaningful. Within 2 months, I had a name, Clarity Studio. I built a website myself, launched a newsletter, and reached out to old contacts. The response stunned me. Former clients of Ethan's who remembered me, the woman behind the curtain, wanted to work with me directly. My first contract came from a bakery run by two sisters trying to rebrand after the pandemic. We met in their kitchen over coffee and croissants. By the end of the meeting, they hugged me. You really listened, one of them said. That night, I cried again, not from grief, but from gratitude. I felt useful. And then came the day Ethan called. He sounded tentative. I heard about Clarity, he said. It's impressive. I'm happy for you. I thanked him, polite but cool. Then he asked, would you ever consider consulting for my team? We're struggling a bit. It was the first time I realized how far I'd come because I didn't even hesitate. No, I said gently, but I wish you the best. It wasn't said out of vengeance, just clarity. I wasn't interested in helping the man who once dismissed my ideas, who broke my trust, rebuild on my back again. Had my own foundation now. My in-laws visited more often, bringing over meals and helping with the kids. My mother-in-law confessed one night over tea. You were always the strongest one, Sophia. We just didn't realize it until we saw what life without you looked like. Her words healed something in me that even therapy hadn't reached. I began speaking at small business panels, sharing my story, parts of it anyway, about starting over, building from scratch, finding clarity through crisis. Women lined up after each event to thank me, to tell me I'd inspired them. One whispered, I'm still in my marriage, but now I know what I deserve. And I knew then this wasn't just recovery. It was becoming. I wasn't just surviving. It was rising. Each step forward was still lined with shadows. There were days I doubted myself. When proposals got rejected, when the kids got sick, and I had to cancel meetings, when I sat at my desk at midnight and questioned if this new version of me would last. But I kept going. I built routines, Monday morning meetings, Friday pancakes with the kids, Sunday walks alone just to breathe. I kept promises to myself, even the small ones. Drink water, return library books, say no when I meant it. Slowly, my world began to take shape, not as a reaction to betrayal, but as a reflection of who I was becoming. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just living fully, intentionally, and on my own terms. And that was more powerful than any revenge could ever be. One evening, as I tucked the kids into bed, my oldest whispered, You're smiling more now, Mom. That night, I stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker, not as reminders of what I'd lost, but of everything I was now building. Piece by piece, I had returned to myself. And this time, I wasn't going anywhere. The invitation read, You are cordially invited to the official launch of Clarity Studio, an evening of vision, resilience, and new beginnings. I sent it to everyone, old colleagues, investors, friends, family, even my ex-husband, and yes, Ava too. The venue was elegant, intimate, and filled with soft lighting and quiet jazz. Waiters passed around champagne and miniature desserts. My logo glowed in soft gold behind the stage. Every detail was curated with precision, not to impress, but to affirm. This wasn't a party for them. This was a declaration for me. I wore a deep emerald suit, tailored to perfection, my hair pinned back, my presence confident but warm. As I moved through the room, I saw faces light up, not just with recognition, but with respect. Halfway through the evening, I stepped onto the stage and gave a short speech, not about betrayal, not about Ethan, not even about pain. I spoke about vision and reinvention and the strength in starting over. We are not just stories of what we've survived, I said, scanning the crowd. We are architects of what we choose to build next. When I stepped off the stage, people applauded, not out of politeness, but from genuine resonance. I felt it in the air. I belonged here. This wasn't borrowed space anymore. It was mine. Ethan arrived late. He stood in the back, unsure, out of place. He looked older than I remembered, like someone who had been hollowed out by his own bad decisions. When our eyes met, I nodded politely, then turned away. Ava arrived with him. She wore a glittering dress that looked like it wanted attention but didn't earn it. She clung to his arm, then froze when she saw the crowd, the energy, the success they no longer had access to. Later, I overheard whispers. Ava's child wasn't Ethan's. He'd taken a paternity test, quietly. The results had destroyed what little remained between them. During the networking hour, several former investors of Ethan's approached me. Your presentation felt like what we hoped for years ago, one said. You were always the visionary, weren't you? I didn't deny it, I just smiled. Ethan tried to catch me alone. He waited until I was refilling my drink, then walked up and asked, "Can we talk?" Turned, glass in hand. About what? I messed up, he said simply. "Uh, I lost you and everything." I studied him for a moment. The man I once built dreams with, now looking like a stranger to them. You didn't lose me, I said. You gave me away. He looked stunned. Then, almost quietly, would you ever consider— No, I cut in. Don't finish that sentence. He nodded slowly. Right. I just had to try. You did try, I said, at all the wrong times. He backed away, shoulders heavy. I turned and joined a conversation with a tech founder and a philanthropist. I didn't look back because I didn't need to. That night, when I returned home, I took off my heels, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the balcony. The skyline sparkled, not in triumph, but in peace. And peace, I realized, was the greatest power of all. The next morning, headlines buzzed in local business media. From shadow to spotlight, how Sophia James built a brand of her own. Photos from the event flooded social media. Mentions of Clarity Studio tripled. My inbox was filled with partnership offers, interview requests, and speaking invitations. But what meant more than any of that was a handwritten note delivered that afternoon. It was from Ethan's father. It read, "Dear Sophia, we sat in your home and watched you carry a truth none of us were brave enough to see. Last night, I finally understood the weight you bore for years. You are not just the daughter-in-law we loved. You are the leader we admire. Thank you for reminding us who you've always been." I cried, not because I needed validation, but because some acknowledgments come too late to fix the past, but just in time to honor the future. I framed that letter not out of pride, but as proof I had reclaimed everything they thought I'd lost. That same week, I walked into a former investor meeting where Ethan once silenced my input. This time, they handed me the head seat. No one interrupted. They took notes when I spoke. The same man who once told Ethan, "Your wife should smile more," now stood to shake my hand, saying, "You've changed the way we see leadership." I didn't correct him. I'd always been this way. They just hadn't looked closely enough before. And now, I wasn't asking to be seen. I was impossible to ignore. As I left that meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "You win." I didn't reply because this wasn't a game. It's my life, and I was finally living it on my terms. Clarity wasn't just my company's name, it became my way of life. And standing in it, I had never felt more powerful. Ethan lost everything, but not all at once. That would have been too merciful. It started with investors quietly pulling out. Without my strategic oversight and network, the company floundered, projects stalled, campaigns failed. His charm, once his greatest asset, couldn't mask the fact that he no longer had substance behind the smile. Then came the press, murmurings of internal mismanagement, of high-level clients being poached by a mysterious new player in the market. That player was me, though I never said it aloud. Ava, once paraded like a trophy, faded from his side. She gave birth to a baby boy with features Ethan couldn't explain. The paternity test was definitive. Ethan wasn't the father. The fallout was cruel. He moved out of the condo they'd shared, now steeped in awkward silence. She tried to spin a narrative, blaming him for abandoning her, but people weren't buying it anymore. Sympathy had shifted. Her influence, so intoxicating when she played the mistress, disintegrated when she became the woman who lied to everyone, including herself. She reached out to me once via email. "Maybe we both got played," she wrote. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to reconnect with his parents, but the damage lingered. His father, always proud and private, refused to attend a single meeting Ethan invited him to. His mother, sweet, loving, sent him food sometimes, but her voice over the phone was distant, like someone speaking to a stranger they used to know. I later heard that he tried therapy. Good, I hope he found clarity. But it wasn't my job to witness his healing or be his landing place. The last time I saw him, he was sitting outside a cafe I loved, alone. His suit looked slept in. He was staring at nothing, coffee cold. I passed without stopping. He didn't even look up. And Ava? She vanished from public view, deleted her social media, moved to another city, I think. No one seemed to notice or care. Some people say revenge is sweet, but I didn't feel sweet. I felt steady. I hadn't orchestrated their fall. I simply stepped away and let gravity do what it does best. Ironically, the people who once dismissed my worth began seeking my advice. Ethan's former board chairman emailed asking if I'd consider consulting on a new startup. I politely declined, but I smiled. Even the media tried to sensationalize it. Ex-wife triumphs as former CEO falters. I turned down all interviews focused on Ethan. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about creating space where women didn't have to break to be seen. My children knew the story in pieces, what was age appropriate, but they also saw me build something with my bare hands, watched me stand tall when others might have collapsed. That was the legacy I cared about. One night, my son asked, "Do you still hate him?" I thought for a moment, then said, "No, I just don't carry him anymore." Because I didn't. He was no longer a weight, just a chapter. And I had already turned the page. Some people begged me to forgive them for not warning me, for not defending me for once, thinking I was just the supportive wife. Um, I forgave them mostly because holding on to bitterness is like dragging chains into a future you've worked hard to free. I chose lightness. I chose forward, and I never looked back. Even years later, when people mention their names, I feel nothing. Not anger, not pain. It goes back to just distance and peace. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without flinching. And I had finally arrived at that place. People often ask me now if I'd ever marry again. I tell them I'm already in the longest relationship of my life with myself, and it's the healthiest one I've ever had. There's a calm that lives in my home now. Mornings begin with quiet coffee, not tension. Evenings are filled with stories and laughter, not suspicion. The kids are thriving, not because I shielded them from the truth, but because I showed them how to walk through it with grace. I used to think strength meant endurance, staying, holding on no matter what. But now I know real strength is knowing when to let go, letting go of who they wanted me to be, letting go of the fantasy I worked so hard to believe in, letting go of love that didn't love me back. And in that release, I found room to build something better. I found room for me. Clarity Studio grew faster than I expected. Within a year, I had a team, an office, and clients from across the country. But more than the numbers, it was the stories that mattered. Single mothers rebuilding careers, women launching businesses they were once told were just hobbies. They told me, "You made space for us." But that's all I ever wanted, to build what I never had. A safe space, a strong one that says, "You're allowed to be both broken and brave." I still get invitations to speak, to share, to mentor, and I do with honesty. I don't hide the scars, I show them. Because if my healing gives someone else a map through their pain, it was all worth it. Not long ago, I passed by the house Ethan and I once shared. It was for sale, empty. I stood across the street and looked at it, not with regret, but with remembrance. That house taught me how far I'd come. It taught me that a home is not where you live, it's where you're finally free. I don't hate Ethan. I don't hate Ava. I don't even wish things were different, because from that heartbreak, I built something unshakable. I built myself, and I like her, the woman who rose from it all. And not because she's flawless, but because she never gave up on herself. Some days are still hard. Healing isn't linear. There are moments when a smell, a song, or a street corner triggers a memory I'd rather forget. But now I let it come. I don't run from the past anymore. I welcome it, sit with it, then let it leave. Because I've learned that being whole doesn't mean being untouched. It means being open, even after being broken. And that's what I teach my children: to feel deeply, to forgive wisely, to rise anyway. The future still feels uncertain sometimes, but I no longer fear it. I trust myself to handle whatever comes. I trust the woman I've become, the one who walked through fire and came out clearer, kinder, and more capable than ever. Not bitter, not burned, just whole. If I had to leave one lesson behind, it would be this: you are not the sum of who betrayed you. You are the sum of who you chose to become after. In that version of you, she's worth everything, which is the ending and the beginning.